Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's New Directions webinar. Today we'll be talking about co-creating an evaluation rubric for plurilingual children. And thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Dr. Dan Zhao. I'm part of the English language research team at the British Council. I will be facilitating today's session. So before we begin, I will briefly go through a few housekeeping points. To begin with, the session will be recorded and link will be shared after the webinar. And please do avoid using AI note takers where possible, as the automatic message can be distracting. Also, do use the Q&A button on top of the screen for any questions that you might have. And please do upvote questions of interest to you. 2 to 3 polls will be launched during this webinar, which will appear on the screen for your response. Please do access through the chat if you have joined via the web browser. The attendance certificates will be available on the completion of the feedback survey at the end of the session. Also, the survey link will be shared in the chat at the end of the session. The presentation slides will also be shared with the participants by email after the session. So today we're very delighted to host Dr. Janine Knight, lecturer in applied linguistics at the Universitat Internacional de Catalunya, and Dr. Marta Segura Moya, lecturer at the University de Barcelona, whose work focuses on multilingual acquisition and language education. So in today's session, Jenny and Marta will be sharing their British Council report on co-creating a school, child, family rubric for accessing children's plurilingual and intercultural competence in a Catalan primary school. So we hope this session will speak both to classroom practice and to wider questions about inclusive assessment. So with that, Jenny and Marta, thank you so much for being here today. I will now hand over to you to start.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. My name is Janine Knight, and I'm a teacher trainer, languages teacher, and a researcher based in Barcelona, Catalonia, Spain.
And hello, everyone. I'm Marta Segura, also a teacher trainer and researcher at the Faculty of Education at the University of Barcelona. And today we're also presenting on behalf of the whole school team that participated in the project. They are not here live, but you will see bits of them and hear some of them as we go through the webinar. So before we start, we wanted to get to know you a bit. So some of you have already been doing that in the chat. Just quickly let us know where everyone's from or based so that we see when we get to know our audience. We can see some people from Romania, Turkey, Peru, a couple of them as well, Ireland, Bulgaria, Taiwan, Thailand, the Basque Country. So lots of different places, different time zones. So thank you everyone for finding the right time to join the webinar today. Peru, Cyprus, Armenia, UK, Pakistan. So great, welcome everyone. And then we have a second quick poll before we begin. So we would like to see why you're here today. So what is your role today? Are you here as teachers, as researchers, as policymakers, language learners, or parents, or carers, or maybe more than one? So you should now see a poll pop up in your screen. And we'd like for you to tick the options that best represent your role here today. Okay, so we have some answers coming in. Most of you are teachers, researchers as well. There's a few language learners, that's it. And fewer policymakers have parents, so mostly teachers and researchers, right? Okay, so let's start. And I'll give the floor to Janine now.
Thank you. It's great that the audience is so international, and we're very happy to share this project with you today. So welcome. So the aims of today's session is twofold: to gain insight into how we captured the full scope of children's plurilingual and intercultural knowledge and skills, their competence, by co-creating an evaluation rubric with children, families, and teachers. Also, to offer you free tools and resources that can support you as head teachers, teachers and researchers to co-create and carry out a similar process in your own context. So in this session, we're going to present the final rubric and motive for the project, describe the co-creation process, outline the frameworks that we use that underpin the rubric, highlight how the design is context sensitive, language sensitive, and sustainable, offer some key takeaways and conclusions, and finally conclude with showing you how to access free resources and related publications. So let's start with the motive of the project. So the idea to co-create an evaluation rubric to assess children's plurilingual and intercultural competence came out of a conversation that I had with a head teacher in 2023, a head teacher of a primary school. And she was reflecting on the huge diversity of languages and cultures in the school and commenting on how rich that was, both for the school and for the children. And this diversity, as I'm sure many of you know, is not unique and characterizes many schools, especially in Europe. So the primary school in this project is based in Barcelona, Catalonia, Spain, which you can see on the map here on the slide. And the official school language in the state system in Catalonia is Catalan, and Spanish is also being taught as a language subject, and English is also typically taught as a foreign language in the schools. But there are many other languages and cultures that are also present in the school due to the huge range of languages that children understand and speak. Also, in the Catalan state schools, teachers have to evaluate children's plurilingual and intercultural competence as part of the curriculum. However, how to do that is not specified, which raises the question as to what tools exist to evaluate this competence, as well as an important question, which is, which languages are we going to include? Only school-taught languages or all of the children's languages? So if we look at this slide that relates to what we can call the linguistic and cultural superdiversity of the children in the 5th and 6th year in the school who formed part of the project, we can see that there are over at least 13 languages across these 2 year groups. And in this slide, we can see that the number of languages that the children said that they either spoke or understand. And the majority of children spoke or understood 4 or 5 languages, with some children with 6, 7, even 8 languages. So we are not seeing a situation with plurilingualism relating to 2 or 3 languages, nor are we seeing a plurilingualism relating just to school-taught only languages. But we're seeing a plurilingualism that is characterized by all the languages that the children have inherited or are in contact with, whether they're European or non-European. So when we come back to the goal, when both the head teacher and myself were thinking about a possible evaluation tool, we wanted to make sure that the tool could reflect and capture all the children's languages. And therefore, we wanted to create a self-assessment tool, evaluation tool for children to assess themselves, and an evaluation tool that teachers could use easily as well. And we also wanted it to have potential that both children and teachers could evaluate together. And in addition, this meant that the results could inform the teachers' end of year achievement record cards that were sent out to the families. And by doing so, the school could officially recognise all languages. So now I have outlined some reasons why we thought it was important to recognise all of the children's languages. And now we want to have your thoughts of why it is important. So why do you think it is important that schools recognise all of the children's languages and not school languages? So please let us know in the poll that has appeared in the chat. What do you think? So everyone, yeah, just go ahead and type why you think it is important. And it doesn't have to be in English either.
Okay, so we see already some answers to the poll. Some of you are typing in the chat, which is fine as well. A few of your ideas that have just been submitted. So we have inclusive or inclusivity. Yeah, that's the biggest one. Real inclusion, someone said as well. Social justice, identity, diversity, languages, cultural side as well is being mentioned in the chat. To empower children. So lots of different ideas. Inclusivity is still the biggest one. What else? Cultural richness as well. Emotional background, linguistic repertoire. Identity, also respect the kids. Sense of belonging. Be confident in their own languages. Language knowledge, languages at home. So lots of ideas that we'll come back to. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks so much for all your thoughts. Now we're going to have a look at why the partners in the project thought this was also important. So please turn up your volume so you can hear them well. And let's first listen to a child from the project. So why do you feel that it's important that schools recognise all the children's languages and not just school languages?
I think it's good for them to be able to express their culture and for others to learn about it too.
Okay, now let's listen to a parent.
Recognizing these languages, it's important to know that kids that are, are quite separated in their experience with their language from home and school, or they're doing their schooling in their second language or third language. They're then the work that they're being asked to do and the outputs that they're presenting they're having to do that in a much restricted vocab with a much smaller vocabulary than the one that they have in their first language. And so expressing ideas, creativity, all of that I think is much more challenging. And so if there's a way to draw on their native language where they have a much broader range of expression, I think is really validating for the kids and for the group, I think, as a whole. I think it's really important that the schools recognise the experience of the kids who have multiple languages, particularly when there's a big division between the language being spoken at home and the one being spoken at school, as opposed to a sort of multilingual family. I was very aware with my own kids that there was definitely a sort of extra layer of work that they were having to do, a sort of an extra sort of mental load, because they were always needing to translate, whether it was for themselves, amongst their friends, or when they're bringing information home back and forth. Sometimes there was a bit of extra responsibility with those kids to help their parents understand the communication from the school, that other kids won't, obviously won't need to do. So I think, so that's kind of the interaction back and forth between school and family, but also just in terms of being able to express themselves. I think it's not to recognise and to assume that they will be able to just kind of assimilate and move between the languages naturally, because it can look like they're doing that, I think, on the surface, but I think underneath there's a whole lot of other stuff going on which makes it much more complicated.
Okay, and now let's listen to the head teacher, and this video is in Catalan, but the subtitles are in English.
És important que les escoles reconeguin totes les llengües dels infants, perquè la llengua no és només una eina per comunicar-nos, també forma part de la identitat, de la família, de la cultura i de la manera d'entendre el món. L'escola ha de donar valor i reconèixer, a més de les llengües escolars, que són el català, el castellà i l'anglès, les altres llengües que porten els infants, per tal de fomentar-los l'autoestima, la participació i el sentiment de pertinença. D'aquesta manera, els infants es senten més respectats i visibles, es reforça la seva identitat i confiança, es crea un ambient més inclusiu i intercultural, les famílies poden participar més en la vida escolar i els alumnes així entenen que el multilingüisme és una riquesa i no un problema. Reconèixer totes les llengües també prepara els infants per viure en societats diverses, fomentant el respecte, l'empatia i la convivència. Per això, una escola que valora totes les llengües no només ensenya continguts, sinó que també educa en igualtat i en ciutadania. A Catalunya, aquesta mirada està recollida en el model educatiu plurilingüe i intercultural. El currículum vigent destaca que cal comprendre la diversitat lingüística i cultural a partir del reconeixement de les llengües de l'alumnat i valorar-la com una font de riquesa cultural. Això implica entendre que els alumnes no aprenen llengües de manera separada, sinó que construeixen una competència plurilingüe integrada, on totes les llengües del seu repertori interactuen i es reforcen mútuament. Per aquest motiu també és necessari que l'escola avaluï la competència plurilingüe intercultural, no només el domini d'una sola llengua o d'una llengua concreta. Avaluar aquesta competència és important perquè permet reconèixer habilitats que sovint queden invisibles a les avaluacions més tradicionals. La capacitat de canviar de llengua segons el context, d'establir ponts entre diferents llengües, d'interpretar diferents referents culturals o de comunicar-se en entorns diversos. Això és especialment rellevant en una societat com la catalana, que és plurilingüe i multicultural. A més, aquesta avaluació ajuda a combatre desigualtats i prejudicis lingüístics. Quan l'escola reconeix institucionalment totes les llengües de l'alumnat, transmet que totes tenen valor educatiu i social, alhora que reforça el paper del català com a llengua de cohesió i convivència dins d'aquest model intercultural.
Okay, so as a visual recap of what the partners said, here are some of their reasons for the importance of recognising all children's languages. And I'm just going to leave this for a minute for you to read. Okay. So, if the linguistic and cultural diversity of children is important, which is what the partners are saying here, how can we give value to that, and how can we evaluate that? If we look at this diagram here, the 4 triangles represent 4 languages, but it could be 5 or 6, etc., that are typically assessed as separate single languages, such as in our case, a Catalan test, an English test, and a Spanish test. And in these tests, typically they deal with surface features to be assessed, such as writing, speaking in one language at a time. And so for assessments that want to assess skills and knowledge that plurilingual children have regarding their plurilingual practices, such as translating, interpreting, single language assessments are limited. In fact, they cannot measure plurilingual practices by their very nature. And nor can single language assessments evaluate what is happening beneath the surface, such as using one language to help them read words in a new language, which is basically what is happening cognitively in the central operating system, as Cummins called it in his iceberg model in 2001, which you can see here in the blue figure. So for us, what we wanted the rubric to capture were aspects that were both the visible practices involving 2 or more languages above the surface level, as well as some of the aspects of the cognitive processes that are connected to these practices. And this is represented by the white circles here in the diagram. And we also wanted the rubric to be inclusive of all the children's languages and not limited to 3 or 4 as implied in this diagram. Okay, so now we're going to present the format and the design of the rubric, the different parts of the rubric. And this is going to be followed by Marta describing the co-creation process with the partners. So here we have the first page, and this is the bilingual version. This version is in Catalan and English. And there are also versions in single languages in Catalan, single languages in English. A Spanish one is going to follow, and potentially an editable version. There is a space for children to tick and write the languages that they can use or understand, and the star is there for children to add up their languages and put a total in the star. The rubric has 8 pages with 11 sections, and they are general mediation, which I'll talk about in the next section, relay information, summarize orally or in writing, explain in writing, translate, understand, use my linguistic repertoire, collaborate with others, take notes, work interculturally, and an I can also section. There are section headers and images to support understanding of the different sections, and there's a 4-level rating scale with smiley faces. And this version there is a bilingual text, so it's in Catalan and also in English. And this last section, there's a space for children to add their own additional I can also. And the last page has a checklist with additional activities which are less school-based, less school-focused, that children can do using more than one language. And actually this checklist came out of us working with the children, and it completely came from them. So now Marta is going to talk about the co-creation process.
Thank you, Janine. So let's see, we work together with a school based in Barcelona, and we work with 4 different groups of partners together in this project. The first group was the teachers, the school teachers. This group included 17 school teachers from pre-primary and primary levels, and the head of the school as well. The second group were the kids, so 40 children in 5th and 6th year in primary. These are the last 2 grades in primary here in Catalonia. And these kids all were super diverse, as Janine has mentioned just a few minutes ago. They spoke up to 12, 15 different languages among the 40 of them. The third group was the parents. So there, we had 10 volunteering parents from these super diverse children that agreed to participate in the project and join in the sessions. Basically, we wanted them to be part of this to get their input of what is actually going on outside of the school. So we had the school teachers and the children that could talk about the school-based activities, but we wanted parents' input as to what kids are actually doing outside of the school walls. And finally, the last group was us two as teacher trainers and researchers. As for the whole process, this took place over one academic year, and we followed what is called participatory action research together with focus group activities. Now, what do we mean with participatory action research? This is a bit abstract, so it will be clearer in the next slide. But basically, it's a framework that works around different loops, like you can see here on the figure. So we start by defining a problem, which is the first meeting that Janine had with the school head teacher. And then after defining this problem, there's an action that is designed and implemented to kind of work through the problem. And this is followed up by an observation session, or that happens at the same time. And then there's a reflection process that allows us to redefine the problem and move on to the second loop of redesigning the action, implementing it, observing, reflecting, and then next loop until we are happy with the result. So what these loops look like for us were each of the different sessions that we had with the different partners. So here you can see the full timeline, if you can call it that we followed through the whole academic year, and each of the color boxes would be one of the loops. So there was a reflection process after each session. There was implementation of feedback of reflections, and then we started the next loop. So within the 4 first sessions, we worked on pre-tests as the researchers, like, for example, filtering the CFR descriptors as the starting point, setting up the whole project and the process. Then we worked with the teachers on a first session, and with a smaller teachers commission on a second session, and then with the parents as well. So in these first sessions, we basically worked on the descriptors that we wanted to include in the rubric. Then we turned to the children's sessions, which we divided up in 4 shorter sessions, but the content was quite similar to the content we did with the teachers and the parents. We worked first on an introduction session to get the kids to talk about and reflect about the languages they speak and understand, as well as things they can do using different languages and cultures. And then on the last 2 sessions, we worked on the descriptors themselves and the design of the rubric itself. Then we had parents and teachers come back for a joint meeting to work on the design. And at the end, we did a piloting session with a few parents, the kids in the 2 grades, and also the school teachers. So now we're going to break these up, and we're going to show you some examples of the activities that we did with each of the groups. So we started with the teachers. We started by presenting the main objectives of the project, as well as the key concepts. And we use traditional PowerPoint slides, like you can see here, with the activities that we were doing in the session. What we did first was review the original CFR descriptors that you can see here. So we basically gave them an Excel file with the CFR descriptor, the mode of communication, the activity strategies or competences, if there's any for each descriptor, the scale. So for example, overall mediation, relaying information from speech to sign or speech to text, the level, so B1, B2, A2+, and so on, and the descriptors themselves. And we gave the teachers the full list that we filtered out. Then we asked them to filter this and select the ones that they felt were appropriate for a child finishing primary school here in Catalonia in their school context specifically. And basically we asked them to tick and cross. So tick the ones that felt appropriate and cross out the ones that maybe the level was not appropriate or just didn't fit within that school setting. So like you can see here in the second image, there's ticks, crosses, also tiny edits in the school, in the yellow sections. And we asked them to vote as well. So on this in the circles, we have how many teachers voted for each descriptor. And then we clean this up. Yeah, so they did this in groups. And so we picked up the descriptors that were voted the most, and we put them here in yellow. The next column shows the number of votes that we had for each of the descriptor. And the comments that you can see here, the idea is not that you read through this, it's just that you see the process that we followed. These are the comments that we got from each of the 4 parallel focus groups with the teachers. So we integrated all of this, and then we work with the parents. So all of the parents from kids in 5th and 6th year in primary were invited through different modes. We sent out leaflets like the one you can see here on the image, which is based on the Council of Europe's one. Also through school communications, media channels like WhatsApp messages, phone calls, if it was necessary, or via email, like you can see here with a school communication. And then the parents that agreed to participate came for a focus group session where we presented the main concepts. This was very important in this case because we wanted them to fully understand what we meant by plurilingual and intercultural competence and why this was relevant. And we also presented the objectives of the project and the different steps. So we work with teachers, with families, and with children as well. Then we did several focus group activities in which, like the parent before explained, they worked together in different groups. So we brought pedagogical activities, like the ones that you can see here, in several different languages. So we had available translations into the mother tongues of each of the participants that came to this session. So for example, we had Arabic, Tagalog, Urdu, French, English, Russian. You can just see 3 examples here. And we asked them to reflect, for example, here the worksheet that says A, this is which languages can your child speak, or which languages do they understand, what do they do using different languages, or the 2 examples on the right of the slide, they are about languages they use in different places, for example, at home, in school, between home and school, within the community, or with different people, like with adults, with kids, with their family members, and so on. And then the second half of the session, we worked on descriptors editing. So we took the descriptors that the teachers had filtered, we translated them into all of the different languages that the parents had, and then we asked them to do the same, basically, as the teachers. So tick or cross them according to if their children and their friends from the school could do these activities or did these activities, and also to edit them. So like you can see in the yellow boxes, there's lots of handwriting. So we collected lots of comments about all of the descriptors. And now let's see what a parent remembers about working with other parents and how working with all of these different languages within a group felt.
Okay, so I remember coming together, there was quite a large group and we were divided up into smaller groups. Each group had a number of different language speakers in the group. And we were given the material, everybody was offered the material in their own language, in their native language, so that we were able to read through that together. Presentations were given, I think, in Catalan and also in English, so we were sort of somehow muddled through with that. And then yeah, we sort of spent a fair bit of time going through this assessment tool to really decide whether the descriptors that were used within these phrases made sense to us as families of sort of multilingual families, and that they reflected as best as possible the experience that we have and that we felt that our kids were experiencing at school. And yeah, so that's what I remember. As I mentioned, we each had the information in our own native languages, so we were able to digest that easily and quickly. But then we found just sort of naturally that we all fell into using Spanish as the common language. And again, yeah, we were able to refer back to questions so that we didn't need to spend too much time sort of figuring out if there were bits that we didn't understand, but the communication was all done sort of just by default in Spanish.
And what were the different languages that were present in your group that the families had?
I'm pretty sure, you may have to help me to remember, but there was definitely, I'm sure there was French, there was Arabic, and no, can't remember anymore. Tagalog. Yeah, and I think there was a South American Spanish speaker, if I remember, and I don't think there was a Catalan.
Was there a parent from Kazakhstan?
Oh yes, there was. Yeah. And plus, I think a Russian speaker. Yeah, so that was the parent from Kazakhstan.
Okay, and then after this session with the parents, we worked with the children. So we followed kind of a similar structure, but as mentioned before, we broke it up into several shorter sessions, not to overwhelm them as well. So we started by presenting the project, and then we did some of the same activities we had done with the teachers and the parents. So we started by reflecting about languages they spoke, things they did in different cultures, and then we moved on to the descriptors. Like you can see here, we have two examples of the pedagogical activities we use. And with the children, we used a bilingual version of all of these documents. So the orange text was in Catalan and the blue text was in English. Plus in class, several other languages appeared and happened at the same time. So we started by asking them languages they spoke, they understood, and so on. And this was worksheet A, which was an individual reflection. And then the second one that we can see here, this was for them to color in and write different activities they did through different modes of communication. We can see here an example of the kids doing an activity with Post-it notes that now we're going to listen to a kid also refer to. So let's see what she has to say.
What do you remember about working with other children in the project?
I remember like speaking different languages. Like I spoke Spanish with my friends, Catalan with teachers, and then a bit of English.
But do you remember this one? You told me about this one where you put in stickers in and you had to
all
say.
I just remembered was writing sticky notes and then putting like the answers on it, and then like everyone would put it, and it would just be like loads of different answers from everyone.
And what languages were you doing that in there?
Catalan, I'm pretty actually, I can't remember if it was our own language or if it was like Catalan, but maybe a mix of both. I can't really remember.
Yeah, I think you were doing it in a mix. How did you work together with children despite the different languages in your group?
Like the languages we spoke together? Yeah, again, like a mix of Spanish and English. Not Catalan with my actual like friends, but Catalan only with the teacher.
Okay. And what if you didn't understand each other, or if you weren't clear about what someone was saying?
I guess we would just like explain to each other and help each other understand.
So lots of languages coexisting, kids mediating as well among themselves. And then in the last two sessions, we worked on editing the descriptors. So we asked the kids to read aloud the descriptors, tick or cross according to if they did these activities or not, make changes as well, and highlight words that they didn't understand. This is, again, an image of two of the focus group kids working on the editing of the descriptors. And this is some examples of the information and feedback we collected. So we can see, for example, the image from the group at the top. They highlighted some words that they didn't understand in yellow. They added a tiny note at the bottom. And then the two groups at the bottom, for example, they crossed out a couple of descriptors, one each, that they felt didn't fit within their group. They also highlighted words they didn't completely understand in Catalan. And the group at the bottom right also suggested a change in the phrasing of the descriptor. Then we also worked on the formatting with the kids. We collected their feedback, and then we took this feedback, developed another version of the rubric, and had a short meeting with the head teacher where we discussed how we implemented the changes before showing it to the parents and the teachers group. And then now we're going to watch a short extract of this video that, the video call that we had with the head teacher, where we again explain these changes. This video is also in Catalan, but there's subtitles at the bottom in English. Bàsicament ha sigut separar-ho una mica i que quedi més espaiat.
Sí, es veu més esponjat i més agradable.
Sí, és com més atractiu també. Si mires el full com més en global també queda més... Bueno. I llavors, l'altre document que us he enviat és una mica en relació amb aquest punt. O sigui, pensàvem, hi ha coses que els nens fan que no estan reflectides en tots els escriptors que hi ha aquí anteriorment, perquè aquests d'aquí són com més acadèmics, potser són més basats en text, per exemple. I ells fan moltes coses a la seva vida que són més de vivències i aquestes coses que no estan aquí. Exacte. I llavors hem fet com un buidatge de tot el que ens van dir a les sessions aquelles que vam fer en pòstits, que els vam preguntar quines activitats fas treballant amb diverses llengües amb la teva família, amb els teus amics, a l'escola, a casa. I llavors hem pensat que aquesta part d'aquí potser la podrien completar més com amb aquestes experiències que ells tenen, que no són tan potser acadèmiques.
Aquí llavors, jo sota posaria com un parèntesis, no? Que digués, escriu el que tu consideris, o una mica la instrucció. Ja sé que es veu, però bueno.
Escriu el que vulguis afegir o el que sigui, sí. Sí, podem afegir-ho. And then this is the final version of the rubric that Janine already showed before. So this is an example from the piloting. Actually, this is filled in by one of the parents of the school. And we can see on the first image on the left that these kids speak 6 different languages. Then the parents' assessment of the in-between sections in the rubric. And in section 11, the additional can-do statements, they added a couple of their own examples, like translating from different languages or understanding different languages. So a couple of more general ones. Plus, they also tick some of the activities in the final checklist. And then these are some examples from the kids piloting the rubric. So we can see a few different ones here. The first kid speaks 10 different languages, and they also added to the list Punjabi and Korean, for example. The one in the middle speaks 4 languages. The other one speaks 8. These are, again, 3 different examples of how they filled in the middle sections of the rubric. And this is the last section, the additional can-do statements. So, for example, kids can also, or this kid specifically, can speak in different languages when they are eating. They can translate, they can sing in different languages and write in different languages. This other kid also talked about writing and understanding different languages when playing games, for example. And this last one talked about translation, using different languages to talk about what they do in school, playing games, and writing. And this is one example of what we saw most commonly in the last page. So many kids did tick a lot of these boxes. So they do lots of things that are not school related using many different languages. And now on to Janine to show us the frameworks that we base this on.
Okay, so now let's talk about the frameworks that we use to underpin the rubric. So going back before the co-creation process, we had to make an initial selection of descriptors for the rubric, and this is how we did it. We used the Common European Framework for Languages, or the CEFR, the 2018 version, and the Catalan Primary Education Curriculum. In fact, the languages section of the Catalan curriculum is but there are also some important differences that are relevant to the rubric creation, which I will mention further on in the talk. So for the first step, we went to the list of CEFR descriptors, which can be found as an Excel table on the Council of Europe website, and it looks like this. Okay, and there are over 1,000 descriptors, so we had to identify the ones that were relevant for the plurilingual and cultural competencies. And when identifying the relevant descriptors, we were guided by the concept of mediation activities and strategies in the CEFR, which put simply is a communication ability, whereby the learner creates bridges, helps to construct or convey meaning, sometimes within the same language, so monolingually, or sometimes from one language to another, so plurilingually. So an example could be if you are taking notes of this talk now, you might be listening to me speak in English and you might be making notes in English, so monolingual or single language practice. However, other viewers might be listening to me, making notes in English in order to then orally summarize what has been said to a colleague in another language after the talk. And that would be an example of plurilingual mediation. And as I mentioned before, another framework that we referred to is the Catalan primary curriculum, whereby the descriptors form part of intercultural and plurilingual competence, which the head teacher mentioned earlier in the video. And here you can find it translated into English. So these two frameworks were completely compatible, but we found two important conceptual aspects that we needed to address in order to practically move forward. And the first was whether to use the terms intercultural competence from the Catalan curriculum or pluricultural competence from the CEFR. And we decided that given the Catalan context and the fact that the school was linguistically and culturally super diverse, we should use the term intercultural, even though the descriptors on pluricultural competence from the CEFR were incorporated into the rubric. The second aspect that we had to was that in order to make the activities of plurilingual children absolutely central to the rubric, we had to distinguish between plurilingual mediation activities and monolingual ones, which was not explicitly highlighted in the CEFR. So we wanted to make sure that the descriptors in the rubric referred to 2 or more languages without actually specifying which languages. And so just to mention that now we are seeing the term cross-linguistic mediation and intralinguistic mediation being used in official Council of Europe websites and documents, which is great.
And now, so we've been saying that this rubric was designed to be inclusive, but what do we mean by that exactly? So first of all, we believe that the rubric was context sensitive in 2 aspects. So first of all, in terms of the product or the final rubric, so considering the type of students that attend this type of school, we needed to reflect the school language, which is Catalan here, which is the native language of the region, main language of schooling, and instrumental for the kids' development and academic success, but it is not their heritage language. And then also in terms of the process, so children were using a mix of heritage languages, including Spanish as well as the official, as a co-official language through Spain as well, and in Catalonia. And this is a widely spoken language here, especially in urban areas like the one where the school is set. The rubric was also language sensitive. Like we've been saying, one of the main goals was to recognize all of the languages of the kids, both the school taught languages and their heritage languages. This is why we have translated versions, simplified versions, and we integrated symbols to facilitate understanding. And our goal was also to create a sustainable rubric that could be reused and adapted if possible. There's digital versions that can be made, and we are looking into editable versions of the rubric as well.
Okay, so key takeaways from this project, which actually fall into 3 areas. So methodological, theoretical, and practical results. So the firstly is that the project is an example of an innovative methodology. It shows how co-creation and assessing with teachers and families and children as partners can be achieved. And that can lead to the democratization of assessment practices, the prioritization of learner voice, and family engagement. Secondly, the project can be considered inclusive because addressing educational inequalities that negatively affect plurilingual students with migration backgrounds in European school systems is important. It also tries to address the systemic marginalization of many children's heritage languages and shows how teachers and schools can try to rebalance that, give that value and make that visible. And also in decentering single languages by not naming specific languages throughout the rubric, children's agency and action can be prioritized. Thirdly, the project shows that assessment can be context sensitive and both language sensitive. Assessment can inform formal assessments such as the report cards for plurilingual and intercultural competence. And it also shows that partnerships can give a more holistic view of children's linguistic and intercultural competence. Here are the references that will be made available on the slides after the session. And now Marta is going to share with you all the resources and the publications related to the project.
So just a quick note, everything that you see here, you'll be able to access through a QR code that will show on the final slide and that will be sent to you as well. But what can you find through the QR code? Free open access to all of the pedagogical materials we use within each of the sessions. So with the parents, with the teachers, and with the students. These are all available in Catalan and English versions on a repository that's called Open Science Framework. They are stored in different folders for each of the sessions. You can also find the rubrics there, and the only English version on the British Council website has also been made available as of last month, so that's there. If you wanted to know more, we also recorded a podcast a few months ago, which basically has two parts. This is for all audiences, so school teachers, parents, researchers, teacher trainers, policymakers, really anyone who's interested. On the first part, we talk about why this project was important, why they need to rethink assessment. And on the second part, we talked about the collaborative process that we followed. And then if you want to know even more, then we have some more complete and longer written documents. So we have a full technical report on the project that's available as well on the British Council website, and a publication about inequalities and social justice that came out last year. And we are working on the final edits for a chapter about the changing roles of the different partners. So like I just mentioned, all of these resources are available through the QR code that should take you to a Google Sites where you can click all of those. You also have our emails here in case you wanted to know more about the project, collaborate, send us your feedback. We're welcome to all of those. And that's it on our end. So thank you very much for attending today, and we'll take any questions that you have now.
Right. Thank you, Jenny and Marta. That was so rich. That was so interesting. So I can see the rubric sort of like acts as a canvas, to showcase the students like full linguistic repertoires without any kind of like language hierarchies. I absolutely love that top and bottom down kind of approach. So, and also thank you everyone who has already started to put questions into the Q&A box. So you can keep doing that. I'm a bit concerned about time, so I'll try to group some questions together so you can answer like as much as possible. So let's start with a very practical one. It's about this multilingual implementation. So if families, they complete the forms or give feedback in a different sort of like a home or heritage languages, but no one at school can actually understand or read those languages. And so what systems or support would schools need to make sure, those contributions are actually understood and better used?
So basically, like what you've seen before, we used all the different languages so that parents could send their feedback and participate in this process in their own language so that they felt comfortable sharing. However, the idea was that later on, when the school implements the rubric, it is done through the vehicular language of the school, ideally. However, we did add a note in the cover page saying that if somebody wanted a different language version of the rubric, they could address the school and this would be made available to them. So ideally, there's several different versions in the potential heritage languages that the school can have ready. And then there's many softwares nowadays that can help you with translating the responses that you get from parents.
Absolutely, thank you. Ginny, got anything to add?
No, that's fine. I think digital technologies is the key, really. Time saving and yeah, it's just efficient.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. And we also have several comments or concerns around the importance of children's home languages and their family backgrounds and their peer-to-peer language exchange. So how can schools sort of move from simply acknowledging this linguistic diversity to actually building it into the curriculum and assessment kind of practice?
Okay, I'd like to answer that. So one thing is assessing children's plurilingual competence. That's one thing. And then it's another thing on how we build on it and how that is incorporated officially within the school. And I think that's a very context sensitive and language sensitive issue that only individual schools can solve. For example, in Catalonia, we're talking about how we can implement multilingual and plurilingual pedagogies. And that's important because Catalan is the school language, the official school language. Time is dedicated to Spanish as a subject. Time is dedicated to English as a subject. So what it means is where in the school, what timetable subjects or spaces in the school can help us implement plurilingual pedagogies in a very clear way. And we as teachers and as practitioners have to be very clear for the rationale of when and how and where we do that. And that can only come, that solution can only come from schools within a context. It can't come from me telling you where that should be. So certainly in Catalonia, we're having that discussion. Where should plurilingual pedagogies, where can they be found? And what's the rationale for them being in particular places? But that's another webinar.
Thank you very much. Okay, Marta, would you like to chip in?
No, I think Janine answered that very clearly.
Great, thank you. So I think we have time for one last question. So I kind of want to ask it from more like a teacher's or point of view. So for our teachers listening today, what might be this one simple classroom activity they could just try, if they wanted to start building and valuing pupils for linguistic repertoires, like even say before using this whole rubric. If you can, any suggestions?
Mm-hmm. I do have a suggestion. Then Janine, we can each share our favorite one.
Let's do it.
So I would say one of the first activities we did with the children, which is the one with the post-it notes that you saw in the picture earlier. That's a very simple activity. We just sat the kids in diverse groups and they were asked to write about experiences they can remember doing related to different aspects. So for example, using several languages to talk to different people, to attend different events, to go to different places. And this was fantastic because all sorts of things came up, from some more academic related, like using a different language to talk to my teacher, to I go to this festival that happens in my neighborhood, even though it is not part of my culture, but I'm still learning about the festival. So that was fantastic. And we did that with big pieces of paper, so it was easy for everyone to see. You could even hang this on the walls in your classroom and leave that there.
Okay, thank you so much. That's absolutely interesting. Yeah. All right. Okay. So thank you very much, Jenny and Marta, for such an insightful session. I think we all agree, like in the chat, yeah, loads of people are sharing so many ideas. And also thank you everyone for attending this session and for contributing in the discussion. So before we close, we would really appreciate it if you could complete the feedback survey after the session. We will also share the link in the chat by email, or we'll also share the presentation slides and the resources via the email after the webinar as well. So we hope today's session has given you both some clear understanding of the research and some somewhat practical ideas, for thinking differently about plurilingual education and intercultural assessment. Well, more inclusive language education overall. Right, okay, so thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope you do enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, bye-bye, thank you.